What's up? It's me, Austin, or Fuddy Cuddy, and today's video is how I would buff every epic in the Bannerlords faction for Raid Shadow Legends. Now, I made a series a while back, like 2 months ago. It's how I would buff every legendary in Raid Shadow Legends, and it was a 3-part series. I went through like the Telerian League, the Galen Pack, the Corrupted, and the Nyresan Union. I kind of did like a very long video. The thing is that I feel like not a lot of people like watching those long videos, or at least it's a video type that it's not very easy to get into to watch. So what I've done is I'm separating all of them into their own videos for Epic specifically. So we're going to start with Bannerlords, go through all the epics in the Bannerlords faction in this video, and then next week I think I'm going to do it either every Wednesday or Thursday, just so I have a video I always have planned for the middle of the week. Next week we'll do the High Elves and Sacred Earth and Barbarians, and then we'll go down, we'll do Ogre and Tribes, and then, go to the right here, and then go down, go to Demon Spawn, go to the right, Dwarves, and then finish with Sylvan Watchers in like 15 weeks time. I know that's, that's over a long span of time, but hey, it gives me a chance to actually be a little bit more in-depth with these instead of trying to like just zoom through them. I think lets me put more thought and effort into it because I have a week in between every video. But anyway, we're starting with the Bannerlords, like I said, and we got to start with Horden. Obviously, I'm going to go boom, 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 left to right. Horden, he's Magic Affinity. He's an epic. He is not very good. Pretty much, his A1, he attacks one enemy 2 times, grants an extra turn if the target is killed. His A2 attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance of placing a decreased attack on an enemy for 2 turns. Heals a champion by 10% of the damage inflicted. And then he self-buffs with increased attack, crit rate, and speed, and then grants himself an extra turn. That's on a 5-turn cooldown when booked, and it's for the buffs last for 2 turns, and he has speed and faction crypts by 20%. The way that I would buff this guy specifically is the A1 is fine if it actually has good multipliers. First of all, if he doesn't have good multipliers, let's give him good multipliers so he can actually kill stuff. Second, for the self buff, I'm going to try to keep the champion's identities pretty similar to what their kit actually is, but just like improve it. I'm not trying to just fully rework a character. Like maybe I'll do that if I really don't like a way a character works. But for the most part, I'm just going to try to enhance the abilities that they already have. So for this one, it should be a 5-turn cooldown that books down to a 4-turn cooldown. And he should place these 3 buffs for 3 turns on a 4-turn cooldown and then grants himself an extra turn. So then it's like a 3-turn cooldown, and they're on him for 2 turns essentially whenever he uses his ability. And then he could go into using this. He should have 100% chance to place decreased attack. If we wanted to change his identity a little bit, we could make this an AoE, attacks all enemies, has like a 75 that books up to 100% chance of placing a 50% decreased attack for 2 turns, and then heals his champion probably by 20% of the damage inflicted, and that books down to like a 4-turn cooldown, or books down to a 3-turn cooldown, I should say. That could be interesting. Or if we want to go single target, this should be like attacks one enemy, has a 100% chance of placing a 50% decreased attack for 2 turns, and then maybe heals his champion by 10% or 20% of the damage inflicted. And then maybe it says like we'll ignore 25% of the target's defense, or maybe even 50%. It's only a one-time hitter. That's the issue, right? So yeah. Or maybe we could do grants an extra turn if a target is killed by this ability, because he also has that on his A1. His A1 is fine. Maybe he could ignore like 10% defense on each hit or something just to make it a little bit better. His speed and faction crypts, I mean, it could be an all battles aura, but I'm not going to mess with that because there is a place for stuff like this. Maybe he has a passive that whenever he kills an enemy, maybe it just straight up grants him an extra turn. Maybe get rid of this and then just like have it so that it's a passive, just because that'd be funny. I don't know. Personally, again, this is very heavily changing his, not heavily, but kind of changing his identity. I would just make this an AoE 100% decrease attack that just does really good damage. Maybe, like I said, ignores defense and heals by 20% instead of 10%. That would be a good change because at least he would bring a good debuff if you want that. Or if you want him to just be an AoE nuker, you could kind of ignore him placing the decreased attack and just build him for straight nukage. Same thing with his A1. Make him ignore 10 or 20% defense or 15%, something like that. Make the self buff better. Maybe buff his base defense a little bit and his base speed. So yeah, also for base stats, there's a lot of champions, especially the outdated ones, that have really crappy base stats. If I don't mention it, then at least know that I probably would have normally if I just like remembered. A lot of these, you could just argue that they just need to increase their base stats just to be better as well. For example, early Legionary, he could have some more base defense or more base HP or have over 100 base speed. That would be nice. But Lordly Legionary, he is a free login champion, actually. So he is a pretty relevant one for talking about this because you're going to get him after 150 days of playing the game. And let me tell you something about this guy. He's not very good. He's meant to be a Fire Knight champion, but part of his kit synergy he doesn't bring. So as you can see, his A1 attacks one enemy 2 times, places an extra hit if the target is under a 50% heal reduction, places 2 extra hits if the target is under 100% heal reduction. And you might think, oh, he must bring heal reduction, right? He does not. He doesn't bring the thing that actually makes his A1 really good for breaking the Fire Knight shield. And also, part of the reason I don't like this, a 2-time hitter is fine for Fire Knight, but if you want to be good, like your kit overall be good for Fire Knight, a 3-time hitter really is the golden standard for that. He does, like I said, he doesn't even bring the heal reduction, which really sucks. So the way that I'm going to change this guy, okay, hold on, let me read the rest of the kit. I'm getting ahead of myself. So his A2 attacks one enemy, has a 100% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns, decreases the target's turn meter by 20% if the decreased speed debuff is placed, and then he places a 30% reflect damage and 15% continuous heal on all allies for 2 turns on a 4-turn cooldown. So first of all, I want to say something. His sword is flaming, so I don't know why he doesn't do an HP burn, to be honest with you. I think for his A1, it should be attacks one enemy 3 times, has a chance to place HP burn probably on each hit, and then places an extra hit on the target if they are under a decreased speed debuff, which is what he brings in his kit, right? I think the HP burn would just be a nice little nice little cherry on top, just to have an extra debuff to be nice. So he starts with a 1 or a 3-time hitter by default. It can be a 4-time hitter if the target has decreased speed. So he's still good at breaking the shield, and if the shield ever goes back up for Fire Knight specifically, he's even better at doing it as long as the Fire Knight has decreased speed, which they should have. And then, like I said, that HP burn is just a nice cherry on top sort of debuff. And then for his A2, it only attacks one enemy. Honestly, this should be an AoE. This should be attacks all enemies, and then it does the same thing that it says in the kit. Just instead of attacking one enemy, it attacks all enemies. I think if they did that, he would be really nice for waves, for control, just in general. 30% decrease speed and 20% turn meter drop if that decreased speed is placed, and it's on a 3-turn cooldown. That's actually a really nice ability to have, and very useful in a lot of areas in the game. And it also makes him actually quite viable for Hydra as well. So yeah, already he would just be good for Fire Knight and be good against waves and Hydra. So let's look at his A3 now. Reflect damage isn't great. Now, it does give you, 5 free hits if it's on all allies to break the Fire Knight shield. The issue is that the strategy for beating Fire Knight is you break the shield and you keep the shield down. That's just the whole goal. So we should just get rid of this reflect damage. Continuous heal isn't terrible as well. I'm thinking places maybe a 50% increase accuracy and maybe like a 30% increase speed on all allies since he brings decreased speed. So it puts 50% increase accuracy, 30% increase speed on all allies for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown. Or if they want to keep it on a 4-turn cooldown, it should be 50% increase accuracy, 30% increase speed, and then that 15% continuous heal on all allies for 2 turns on a 4-turn cooldown if they want to keep this the same. I think that would be cool. Another thing they could do is add a passive. I'm not going to add a lot of passives because this is very abstract now. This is really just based on opinion. His passive could be something like, I don't know, have something to do with either placing his decreased speed, or something with multi-hitters. I don't really know. Maybe his passive is that every time the champion hits an enemy, has like maybe like a 50% chance to reduce the enemy's turn meter by 10%, like whenever he hits an enemy with any of his like stuff. So on his A1, since it's a 3-time hitter, before you place the decreased speed, he would have, he can attack one enemy 3 times. Essentially, his passive would give him a chance to reduce the turn meter by 10% per hit. That could be a cool way to do it, like on a passive. And then it could also apply to this to be an even stronger sort of like CC. Just an idea. Also buff his base stats. Archmage Helmet, he's a great champion. He doesn't need buffed. Gerhard the Stone. It's funny that he's called Gerhard the Stone whenever he has the base HP of a piece of printer paper. Like, look at this. That is 12,000 base HP. Let's get this to at least 16,000, if not more, just to be more survivable. He actually has pretty decent base speed for an epic. He has good base attack. He's meant to be a nuker. I think what they should do is he attacks one enemy and ignores defense. His A1, he attacks one enemy, has a 25% chance placing a stun for 1 turn, has a 50% chance when booked instead for placing the stun for 1 turn if they have 75% or more turn meter. And then his A2 is kind of weird because it's just like he self-buffs himself, and then he attacks one enemy, ignores 25% of their defense normally, or 50% if they're under increased defense. I think, again, this guy's single target. I think he should just have an AoE hit. Because whenever you have AoE hits and like you're an AoE nuker, things become a lot better. Maybe he has an AoE stun. We can lean into like the stun more a little bit. Also, this icon right here looks like a stun icon to me. So maybe he self buffs himself with increased crit rate and increased crit damage, and maybe like a 50% increased accuracy on himself for 2 turns. Then he attacks all enemies, and then maybe, it ignores 25% of the target's defense. Get rid of this thing right here, and then just like has like a 50 that books up to a 75% chance to place the stun on a 3-turn cooldown. That's a very strong epic AoE ability, but it would be interesting. His passive, he's immune to CC, like the basic CC debuffs. And it's on a 3-turn cooldown. I think this could be less. This could be like on like a 3-turn that books onto a 1-turn cooldown or something, because at least you would get 1 chance of being immune to like CC, but kind of a basic buff. It would just make him make more sense to actually use. Arndulf, he's actually not a bad champion. His A1, he attacks one enemy, has a 30% chance of placing provoke. His A2 attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance of placing 25% weaken for 2 turns, and has a 50% chance of placing fear for 1 turn. And then he places reflect damage on all allies for 2 turns and a counterattack on himself for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown. His base stats aren't bad. I think what they should do, they should keep this ability the same. It's fine. This ability is all like, reflect damage isn't the greatest. Maybe give him a passive that has to do with reflect damage. Maybe if an ally is attacked under a reflect damage that this champion places, maybe he counterattacks, kind of like, Helicath. He does that whenever his allies are placed under block damage. He'll counterattack the enemy that attacked. Maybe they give him a passive like that. And then also what they could do for this ability, maybe it should be attacks one enemy 3 times and then has the same chance of placing provoke for 1 turn, just to make this provoke a little bit more consistent. And also, it would be a little bit nicer for Fire Knight specifically. So that's what I would do for him. Signy of High Shield. First of all, they should have given her a way cooler cape. Let's be real here. Come on. Like, what is this? This is like a sidekick sort of cape. Like, look at all the other ones. Hold on. Even Gerhard, who's like a really old champion, right? Look, he's got a cool cape. Archmage Helmet's got a really drippy cape, heck, even Lordly Legionary, he's got the like Abyss Watcher's Dark Souls vibe with the cape. First buff for Signy is give her a really cool cape. Okay, that's the first thing. Second of all, Let's read her kit. A1 attacks one enemy 2 times each hit, has a 50% chance of placing a 50% decrease resistance debuff for 2 turns. Each hit also heals the champion by 20% of the damage inflicted. Her A2 attacks all enemies before attacking, has a 100% chance of removing one random debuff from all allies after the attack, has a 100% chance of removing a random buff from all enemies that's on a 3-turn cooldown. And then she places 50% increased resistance and 30% reflect damage on all allies for 2 turns on a 4-turn cooldown. If we don't add anything to this, this should just be a 3-turn, like a 4 or a 5-turn that books down to a 3-turn cooldown, first of all. Second of all, for this, if they wanted to make this better, it should be before attacking has a 100% chance of removing maybe 2 random debuffs from all allies, and then after the attack has a chance of removing 2 random buffs from all enemies. Or it could be a full cleanse for this before attacking thing, and then keep this last part the same, but make this for the allies a full cleanse. That would be really useful. That would probably immediately make her actually like super nice to have for a lot of areas in the game if you don't have a cleanser. Her A1 is fine. It's not the greatest, but it does stuff, so I think it's fine in their passive. When the champion is under a reflect damage buff and an enemy attempts to place a debuff, has a 20% chance to reflect the debuff back on to the attacker. This is actually kind of cool, but 20% is very low and it's not consistent enough. Either increase the chance or make it so that it's a 20% chance on all allies, because then that would be really funny for an epic. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Just make this a 5-turn that books down to a 3-turn cooldown, and maybe make this a full cleanse. Or maybe make it 2 or 3 random debuffs removed from all allies, and 2 or 3 random buffs removed from enemies. Just, again, to make it a little bit more impactful whenever it's actually used. So there you go. Oathbound, he's really cool and actually quite good. I don't necessarily want to change Oathbound's kit. I would say you can make this, instead of attacks at random 4 times, make this an AoE block active skills that has like a 50 that goes up to a 75% chance of placing it, and then the chance increases to 100% if they're under decrease attack. Or if they're going to keep it random, then maybe make it so that it books down to a 3-turn cooldown. I guess I didn't really read his kit, but it's essentially his A1. He has a 50% chance to freeze, attacks one enemy. His A2 has AoE 100%, decrease attack, and decrease turn meter by 20%. The chance to decrease the turn meter is, what was that, 75% chance? Well, actually, it's a 95% chance of placing decrease attack. You need to get the sniper mastery to make it 100%, sorry. And then he has that 4-time hitter at random. Each hit has a 50% chance of placing block active skills, and then the chance increases 100% under decrease attack. You get the idea. Increases base speed. And again, like I said, either make it a 100% AoE that books down to a 4-turn, or if they keep it random, make it so that it books down to a 3-turn cooldown so you can use it, so he can use it more often. But he's great. I mean, he's still like a pretty good epic. Otherwise, Chancellor Yasmin, her A1 attacks one enemy, places an extra hit if the target has no active buffs. Her A2 heals an ally by 40% of their max HP, heals by 60% instead if the ally has 50% HP or less. And then that's on a 2-turn cooldown when booked, by the way. Then her A3 has a 75% chance of removing all buffs from all enemies, then places a sleep debuff for 1 turn on all enemies who have active buffs. Here's what I would do for Chancellor Yasmin. For her A1, it should be attacks one enemy, has a certain chance, maybe a 50 that books up to a 75% chance of stealing a random debuff from the enemy, and then also places an extra hit if the target has no active buffs. Maybe make it a 2-time hitter or something like that, or maybe make it so that she has a chance of removing a buff or a few buffs or something. So then this places an extra hit. Kind of makes sense, right? Or you could give her like a stun or something on here. She needs a debuff. And then for her A2, it's on a 2-turn cooldown, so at least it's a pretty good heal that you get every 2 turns. Maybe make it so that the heal can crit, kind of like Apothecary, but keep it the same. And then for A3, this should be 100. This should be a 75 that books up to 100% chance of removing all buffs from all enemies. And then it should be then places a sleep debuff for 1 turn. Don't have any conditionality. Just then places a sleep debuff for 1 turn and make that like a 3-turn cooldown. And then maybe give her a passive that whenever an enemy, maybe when an enemy loses a turn from sleep, maybe it increases like everybody's turn meter by 10% on your team, all allies turn meters by 10% or something. Something like interesting like that. Or if somebody is woken up early from sleep from like damage or from some other way, maybe it does the same thing or it causes something else to happen. Like maybe it places a decreased speed on them or something. I don't know. It needs to be something like that. Speed in all battles by 20% is pretty nice though. Seneschal, he's actually pretty good. He doesn't necessarily need a buff. I would say maybe make the chance for placing the leech a little bit higher. Other than that, give him a passive, maybe a passive or damage mitigation, or maybe a passive that interacts with his provoke somehow. And he actually has pretty good base stats, so I'm not really going to talk a lot about him. Alaric the Hooded, his A1 has a 50% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 7.5%. It increases by a further 3% for each buff on the target. It's not super crazy. I would like for this to be maybe a 2 or 3 time hitter, and each hit has a chance of reducing the turn meter just for it to be a lot more useful as a turn meter reducer, even excluding like Fire Knight value, just so we can get more turn meter reduction. That'd be kind of cool. And then his A2 attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance of removing 2 random buffs from the target before attacking, has a 100% chance of stealing 2 random buffs instead if the target has 2 or more buffs. Honestly, I think this should just say attacks one enemy, has a 100% chance of stealing all buffs from the target before attacking. I think that's what it should be on a 3-turn cooldown if they're going to keep it attack one enemy. And then his A3 attacks all enemies, has a 100% chance of placing a 50% decrease attack and a 50% decrease accuracy on all enemies. That's actually really nice. It's on a 4-turn cooldown. Maybe it goes down to a 4 of the books down to a 3, but honestly, it's pretty solid as is. This attack in faction crypts by 29%. Let's make it an attack in all battles maybe, or make the attack even higher than this, like 35% in faction crypts. Lady Quellen, she was like a free login character, I think, like you could get from using like a code. Take a sip of my drink. Sorry, A1 attacks one enemy, fills the champion's turn meter by 15% if this attack is critical. All right. Attacks one enemy, places an extra if this attack is critical, fills the turn meters of all allies by 30% if the attack kills an enemy on a 4-turn cooldown. Attacks all enemies, places a 30% increased crit damage buff on all allies for 2 turns. Also places a 50% increased attack buff on all allies for 2 turns if this attack is critical. Clearly, her kit is designed around crits, but I don't like the way it's worded. I think for her A3 specifically, it should be places a 30% increased crit damage buff, maybe increase crit rate, increase crit damage, and increase attack on all allies, and then attacks all enemies. So she buffs before, then attacks all enemies. Something like that. And then maybe if the attack is critical, maybe it grants her an extra turn. That's a very strong ability, but it's on a 4-turn cooldown at least. So you're pretty encouraged to, build for crits. And she self-buffs before, so she actually does good damage on it. So yeah. And then her A2, I'm thinking... See, she places an extra attack if this attack, or extra hit if this attack is critical, and then she fills the turn meters by 30% if this attack kills an enemy. What if she places an extra hit if this attack is critical and places increased speed? Maybe even if it's just 15% increased speed or 30% because she's an epic, and then she does the turn meter fill if she kills somebody, but at least she has an increased speed, and then we'll leave the A1 the same. Something like that. This might be a little strong, the buff that I suggested, so if they don't want it to be that strong, it should just be increase crit rate and increase crit damage on all allies, then attacks all enemies, and then maybe places a 50% increase attack buff if the attack is critical or if she kills somebody, if they wanted to make it more conditional. But I don't really like her kit. I think she looks cool because she's got this sort of blacksmith vibe going on, which is cool. Sir Artemage, He looks cool. His A1 is actually really nice. Attacks one enemy 2 times. The first hit has a 50% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. The second hit has 50% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns. That's very nice. That doesn't need buffed. His A2 removes all debuffs from this champion, then attacks all enemies. Kind of weird. An A3 attacks one enemy, will ignore 30% of the target's defense, places 50% increased attack and 30% increased crit damage buff on this champion for 2 turns. If this attack kills an enemy, these buffs cannot be removed. I don't like this. I don't like it. The fact that they buff their damage after needing to kill somebody, that doesn't make a lot of sense. He should place the increased attack and the increased crit damage before he attacks the one enemy and ignoring 30% of their defense. And then if they want to give something, maybe he gets an extra turn if he kills an enemy, just to make it more interesting. Since it is on a 4-turn cooldown, he would get an extra turn, turn it into a 3-turn, and then he goes into this ability. If it's, I don't know if it should be remove all debuffs from this champion. I think it should be This is just such a weird ability. I mean, removing all debuffs from himself before is actually cool, at least. So let's just pretend he does keep that. Then attacks all enemies. Maybe he gets a debuff of sorts. He already has decreased speed and decreased defense. Maybe he has a decreased attack or a weaken or something on this ability just to make it a little bit more useful. His A1 is fine. His speed in arena battles by 20%. I guess that's all right. Give him some more base speed. Maybe some more tankiness, some more survivability. Knight Errant. He's got 672 base defense. Let's buff that to at least 1,000, but 1,000 is also kind of low, like 1,100 or something. Jesus. His A1 attacks one enemy, has a 50% chance of placing a leech debuff for 2 turns. Will ignore 30% of the target's defense. Attacks one enemy. This is weird. Has a 90% chance when booked of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. Resets the cooldowns on each of this champion's skills if the target is killed. And then his A3 attacks one enemy, has a 100% chance of placing a 25% weaken for 2 turns. Damage is increased by 75%. The champion has full HP. Now, there's a lot we can talk about with this guy, and he has a defense in dungeons by 32%. Did they do that to compensate for how low his defense is? That's still not a lot, considering how low his defense is. But that actually is a really nice aura to have. His A1 is all right. His A1's fine. I don't know what the multipliers are. If the multipliers are bad, buff the multipliers. But otherwise, his A1 is fine. His A2, this needs to be a 70% chance that books up to 100% chance of placing stun. That just have it being a 90% is just shitty. So yeah, there's that. Resets the cooldown on each of the champion skills if the target is killed. That's good. I still think that this should be a 4-turn that books down to a 3-turn cooldown regardless. Because of how simple this ability is. Or what we could do is he also ignores 30% of the target's defense on all of his abilities or something like that. And then for his A3, I know that he hits really hard because the damage is increased by 75%, but my goodness, that's a 6-turn cooldown. Can this book down to like a 4-turn cooldown or something? He only does single target hits. If we want to keep him single target, he needs to be 100% guaranteed one-shotting somebody and actually getting back to this ability somewhat quickly. So let's make this, like, if we're not going to have any more books for cooldown, let's just make this 4 turns. There you go. And let's just make this 3 turns. There you go. Maybe give him a passive. Again, I'm not trying to add too many passives, so I'm not going to say. And give him more base speed and more base defense. Stagnate is absolutely amazing. He doesn't need buffed. He's been good ever since he's released. Mass Fearmonger is weird. He was a Halloween epic. He attacks one enemy 2 times each hit, decreases the target's turn meter by 7.5%. If the target is under fear or true fear debuff, this is where things just already start getting murky. Fear and true fear aren't even the greatest debuffs to begin with. And also what's ironic is he does not have an AoE true fear. Which is just an issue. I'm not going to read through his kit because his kit sucks. So here's what we're going to do. The A1 can stay the same, but for this one, it should be attacks all enemies, has 100% chance of placing a fear debuff, and 100% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns. That automatically actually makes him like decent. And then maybe they could keep this the same as long as this is an AoE up here. Then we're good. And then for his A3, make sure the multipliers are good. And let's see. See, this is weird. Maybe what they should do is keep the revive on death for himself, and then maybe place the block debuffs for 1 turn and 30% increased speed debuff for 2 turns on all allies if this attack kills an enemy. I'm not going to go too crazy with Mass Fury Monger because the kit, there's a lot in the kit, and there's a lot you could change about the kit. If this became an AoE, this first part, it would already just be really nice. So yeah, there you go. And I'm not even going to actually, let me look at the passive real quick. Let me double check. This could probably just be on like, this could low key just be on either no cooldown or like a 1 or 2 turn cooldown instead of 6 turns. My goodness. Giscard the Sigiled. He's really good in my opinion. I pulled him on my one other account and used him a lot. He's very nice. He has a high chance of placing decreased attack on one enemy. He has increased defense and increased attack on a 3-turn cooldown, the big versions for all allies. And he has an AoE 75% chance of placing Provoke. If I had to buff him at all, maybe we make the Provoke just 100% chance, so then it's very consistent. And then, I mean, he was already good before, so then he would just be even better after. Ylfrig is actually really good, so I'm not going to talk about him. Lady Annabelle is also really good. Rowan is not good. It's not too terribly good. This 4-time hitter that places poisons is nice for clan boss. It's on a 3-turn cooldown. Rowan's been buffed multiple times over the span of her existing. Her A2 attacks 3 times at random. Each hit has a 60% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. Here's what my proposed change is. I think her A1 should be attacks 1 enemy 3 times, okay? And then it does the same thing. I think her A2, instead of it being attacks 3 times at random, I think it should be attacks all enemies, has either a 75 or 100% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. So then she can control waves, and then whenever she gets to, for example, the Fire Knight, she has a 3-time hitter on her A1 with heal reduction, and she also has a 4-time hitter. And then again, this ability is useless in clan boss to begin with anyway, so she can still rely on her 4-time hitter with poisons to carry her. This accuracy in faction crypts is all right. It could be accuracy in all battles by 50 instead, if we wanted to make that. Her base defense definitely needs to be buffed. That's very low. Azor is kind of weird. His A1 attacks 1 enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 30% chance of placing a stun for 1 turn. The chance increases to 100% if the target has an increased speed buff. You're hoping the target has a really good positive buff, which I don't like, and it's also conditional. His A2, he places 50% ally protection on all allies except himself, and places his shield on himself equal to 40% of his max HP for 2 turns. It can't be removed. This should be on a 3-turn cooldown instead of a 4-turn cooldown, just for updating for modern standards. And then his A3, coup de grace, attacks 1 enemy, places an extra if the target is a stun. The extra is always critical, steals 50% of the target's turn meter if they are not under a stun debuff. Again, I think what would make the most sense is, again, making a lot of single target abilities AoE solves a lot of problems for these champions. For example, he has a stun on his A1. And the thing is that he places an extra if the target has an increased speed. What if this chance increases to 100% if Azor is under an increased speed like buff? And then maybe his A3, instead of it being this, maybe he places an AoE increased speed buff. Maybe it's an AoE attack that's pretty basic. Or what it could be is maybe attacks all enemies, steals like 10% of each target's turn meter or 20% of each target's turn meter, and then places an increased speed on all allies or something. Like, that's probably something that doesn't really exist and would actually be really nice. And then he could have the same A1. It's just that he needs to be under the increased speed instead of the target. So then he can control when this condition actually is met. That's how it should be for champions. He could also go with like maybe 103 base speed. Pretty much if anybody is under 100 base speed, they should have like 100 plus at least. Maybe 103 is like a good number for like a baseline sort of number. And yeah, so yeah. And then Warcaster, I'm not going to buff Warcaster just for a visual representation, even though that reviews don't mean anything. He's obviously good in Clan Boss and Faction Wars. The reason he's good in Clan Boss is he has his block damage for 1 turn on a 4-turn cooldown, which isn't enough to do a solo unkillable with him, but he enables unkillable teams. He's like a good, like an important part of other unkillable teams. He has a very solid and important niche for that specifically. Maybe for his AoE, it should be 100% chance of placing block buffs for 2 turns. And then for his A1, maybe he attacks one enemy 2 times, and then each hit has a 50% chance of stealing 2 random buffs from the target. Just something basic, or you could give him a passive to make him more interesting. And Ursula the Mourner is absolute. Oh, that voice correct. Did you like that? It was kind of funny. Ursula the Mourner is very good. You want to know what change I would make to her specifically? Maybe give her some more base defense. But other than that, it's reduce the amount of freaking books you need. This is good. This is good, okay? You only need 1 book. It books down to a 5-turn cooldown. Thumbs up. But look at this. That's 8 books right there. And that's 5 more. Let's have this be 3 books. And let's have this be 5 books, okay? And then that would be the best buff for Ursula because she's actually just good otherwise. So that was my buff list for epics. You see how long this video has gone on. I can upload this and a lot more people will be willing to watch it because it's not 2.5 hours long. It's only going to be 38 minutes or 40 minutes long. Those were the Banner Lords. Comment how you would buff any of these. You know, if you've used them before, how would you fix them or buff them? Or any other epics for that matter. Maybe if I make it, next week I'm going to make high elves. Maybe you want to talk about a high elf you'd actually, out of these epics, you want to see buffed. And maybe I'll reference that in, next week's video because that's also less work for me because I'll just use your idea if I think it's good. And yeah, so thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's definitely, again, it's going to be spread out over the span of, here, let's open this. It's going to be spread out over the span of a few weeks. And by a few, I pulled another apothecary that's actually kind of funny. Over the span of, 15 weeks, which is a lot, but this makes it a lot more like watchable and digestible over the span. What faction's always going to happen next week. Obviously, next week is High Elves and Sacred Earth and Barbarians and Ogrins and then, so on and so forth. Again, comment your buff ideas for epics. And yeah, make sure you like and subscribe. I am Austin or Fuddy Cuddy, and I will see all of you, yes, all of you in the next Raid Shadow Legends video. Goodbye.